Good evening. Welcome to episode 21 of In at the Side. I'm Dom Hardman, and tonight I'm joined by Neil Williamson and Damian McGrath. How are you this evening, Damian?
Very well, thank you.
Good. So obviously we just had a little pre-chat. You're now back out in Germany. The boys are back training in groups, you said. How's that sort of? How are you dealing with that as a team?
Well, Germany's a much bigger place than I realised when I arrived here. And most of the players, we're based in Heidelberg in southwest Germany in normal times. But obviously now the players have scattered to the different parts of Germany which they call home. So we're having to, I suppose, like every other sports team in the world, we're doing it all by WhatsApp and Zoom, and the players are training. But things have eased here a little earlier than everywhere else, and we're now back in training in groups of 4, or I will be joining them when my quarantine's over in 5 more days. And we're hoping that will be eased again further in the next few days. The German government are going to make some announcements.
Do you see? Sorry, I was going to say, do you see the Sevens season being affected massively this year by it, or is it a case of, Control Alt Delete, just get ready for next year now? I mean, what's the situation there certainly on your side?
Well, from a German perspective, I think all sports teams have been told not to expect any international competition in 2020. Yeah. And again, I know nothing official, but you hear whisperings on, in the background that the 7th season will be very unlikely to start again, in this calendar year. So I know things change on a daily basis, and you can never say never, but I think we're trying to psychologically prepare ourselves for the fact that it'll be more of a local thing if we get back playing, and internationals won't start for several more months.
That makes a lot of sense. And obviously, I wanted to touch on your long illustrious career. Obviously, you born in Bradford, and also you played a lot of rugby league. Was it for Batley? Yeah. And then obviously went on to coach them in the first instance. Mm. Was that? What was the decision factor there? Were you just fed up of playing? Was it a great opportunity you've been given in the coaching side? What was the decision?
I qualified as a teacher, and I started teaching. I mean, rugby league was professional back in those dark days, but only in the sense that we got paid for playing. We still had jobs. It was semi-professional, I suppose. Rugby union was still amateur in theory. It didn't take me long once I started playing to realise that I just wasn't that good. I could when you get close to good players and you watch them play, and you realise that no matter how hard you work or how hard you try, you're just not going to be as good as them. And it fascinated me always watching good players play, and what was it they did and how did they do it. And I suppose with a teaching background, moving into coaching was an obvious choice. And when the club offered me the opportunity to be player coach for the reserves, I jumped at that chance. And from there, I don't know if but there was no full-time rugby people. But Leeds was a very go-ahead council. I worked in the Leeds City Council as a teacher, and they had a sports development unit, probably the first in the country, and they employed development officers in each sport, which was groundbreaking back then. And I was seconded from the teaching to be the rugby league development officer for Leeds, and that connection through coaching took me into Leeds Rhinos, from coaching at Batley, and I've never had a real job since that day back in 1989, I think it was, when I left, which still seems like yesterday to me, but is an awful long time ago.
Yeah. I mean, so I know.
So how do you go on, Neil? You're on fire today.
No, go on.
Carry on.
I'm just, these questions come to me. I do apologise. Let's say, obviously, you your time at Leeds. I think you were at 2 Challenge Cup finals, including the last ever final at the old Wembley.
That's right. 21 years ago. I think yesterday or the day before.
What was that like, walking out there on that day?
That was awesome. It was every boy's dream to be at Wembley and play at Wembley, and I was never going to get there as a player, but I was fortunate enough to go there as a coach at that last ever Wembley, and it will stay with me forever because it was, a wonderful day. Just the whole thing was wonderful. Yeah.
Excellent.
Where do you think the sport of rugby league stands at the moment? Obviously, they've had a bit of a relief fund from the government in the UK, but sort of overall, where do you see it? Its growth.
I see rugby league as its own worst enemy. Having stepped away from it, having been part of it for so long, and it really is. It is a northern powerhouse in terms of its support base, and it's one of those things that everybody who's involved cannot understand why everybody else doesn't like it, but they're very protective. They don't want anybody else to get involved. Hence, the big issues over Toronto and the French teams, Catalan, being involved. They want the world to recognise them as a great sport, but they don't want anybody interfering in what they do. And that to a degree has been has held it back as sports evolved in general. I don't think moving to summer was a great move for them. I still think they would have been stronger as a winter sport and building on its strengths, but they are struggling in this modern sporting economic landscape to make themselves viable. I think they rely far too heavily on Sky Sports and everything. They've been too innovative sometimes, and they're also following Australia, where it is the national sport. Rugby league is so big over in Australia, and I think they're trying too much to emulate that instead of building their own identity. But that's only me speaking from outside looking in now.
Mm.
So they need to develop the product a bit more, would you say?
It's full of incredibly talented people, and there are so many young players. Where if you get round watching the amateur game, it's still full of talented young players still from that working class background, and it always amazes me that England rugby doesn't spend more time looking there. Not that I'd want them to undermine the strength of the game, but back when I was the last time I was involved with England Sevens with Simon Amor, Simon and I talked with Joe Lydon, who was one of the former rugby league greats, who was performance director at the time. We talked about, wouldn't it make sense to go looking for those talented halfbacks and playmakers from rugby league who at 16 and 17 would be right to be, to get involved in the game and have chance to, to learn the game. A bit like Jason Robinson did when he changed over to Sale. Sale were very clever in that they spent time working on him before he was unleashed on things. And I always thought, that would have been the way to go. But
do you think that, obviously, having worked with both codes, coached in both codes and obviously played as well, would you say it'd be easier for a rugby league player to transgress into sevens or rugby union? What do you think is the most sort of transferable skills?
Well, at this moment in time, I think it's really, really difficult to go from 15s into sevens. As the last Olympics showed when Sonny Bill and Brian Habana, Quade Cooper, because it was new, everybody wanted to play in it. And, I was coaching Samoa in the World Series at the time, and I know how much those players struggled. Sonny Bill, yes, he was a good player, but he wasn't anything outstanding. I remember Dan Norton almost jogging at the side of Stuart Hogg in the Commonwealth Games. He made a break and Dan, chased him down in a heartbeat. And, that's not to decry what Stuart does and what he can do, but the fitness levels and speed of sevens is such that it's harder to come in. And I think rugby league, it's a closer version to rugby league is sevens than the 15s.
Yeah. No.
So how did that transition come then into the sevens scene? Did you sort of move there and seemingly never look back?
Yeah. Well, Leeds Rhinos changed coaches in 2000, and I was also assistant coach of the Great Britain team at the World Cup in 2000. And the new coach who came in from Australia wanted to bring his own staff. and I got an opportunity to move to London Broncos when Richard Branson had taken them over, and they spent a fortune bringing over some big stars from the Australian Rugby League, from the NRL, and I had a fabulous year down there in London. But it was it seems ridiculous now, having spent so long around the world, but just being I'm back to how small the Rugby League world was. Just being down in London away from home, I found really difficult. And I was looking at what I could do to get back home. And Joe Lydon, who I mentioned earlier, Joe had he'd left being performance director at the Rugby League to go and work with in the England setup under Sir Clive Woodward. And Joe and Ellery Hanley, another all-time great Rugby League player, was also involved at the time. And Ellery left, and Joe said there's the Sevens. So back to 2001 now, 2001. The Sevens World Series was just taking off, and Joe had been put in charge of that. He said, we're looking for someone to come on and do skills and defence with the Sevens, and also work in the England A setup, because England A had a Six Nations back at that time, at the same time as a senior team. And he said, do skills and defence with the England A. Phil Larder was the big wheel in the defence world then back in rugby, and there was hardly anybody else I don't think had come across then. And I joined, and I from thinking that going to London was a huge trip, I was suddenly travelling the world on the Sevens, with England A, doing things around the country, different, Six Nations to Italy. And I sort of stumbled into it rather than any plan, and I had to. It was difficult because now the codes seem so close, and everybody accepts that there's it's a two-way thing. But back then there was lots. Rugby union hadn't been long professional. There was lots of people there who still saw rugby league as if you were involved, you were signed eye in rugby. You couldn't be. Even back when I was development officer, we tried to use the local rugby club a couple of times for evening sessions when we had guest coaches, and the clubs wouldn't let us because the RFU, banned them from any. It was still close to that, and so it was difficult for me to come in and to sort of prove myself. I didn't want to come in as the big know-all. I had to try and work, and I had to learn the game as well as try and make a difference as well. So that's how it came to be. And again, it's amazing how choice or chance. The chance meeting with John Wells, who was one of the big drivers at Leicester Tigers in those days when they were winning, or before them, with Dean Richards. John was the forwards coach with England A, and he got me involved with the Tigers then as skills coach. And now that was a learning environment, I can tell you. That was how to learn on the move. So I had a really interesting introduction to rugby. But through the back of all that, the Sevens was always the sort of spine of everything that you did. That I enjoyed that the most because it was closer to rugby league, but it allowed me to do other things as well.
Awesome. Would you say there's anyone? I mean, this is a bit of a throwaway question, I suppose, but is there anyone in the union, any of the union teams at the moment that you would think, God, I wish he was German, or he'd be good at Sevens? It's a bit of a random question, but
in the England setup,
yeah. I mean, is there anyone you think, bloody hell, I wish I could just nick him, just change coach to Sevens?
I've thought that when I was in Canada and Samoa before me. I wish. There are so many talented young players in the UK alone. I did a stint in Wales as head of rugby in North Wales at RGC. Was the North Wales region, and to say it was seen as a development region, there were so many talented young players there, and many of them have gone on to play down in the south of Wales. Yeah. But the UK is so lucky, and I sometimes feel that we don't realise how blessed we are with talent, and I just feel sometimes we toss away players, and Sevens, I think, it'd be a great vehicle to get lots of those players who don't make the cut involved. And
well, we were touched on this the other day that certainly New Zealand seem to, not officially, but use Sevens as a bit of a springboard for the young players for their national team. Is that something you'd like to bring in with every country, possibly, like the first couple of years playing rugby in sevens?
Yeah, it's different the world over. In Samoa, and I think Fiji is probably the same, Tonga, sevens is a gateway to the world for them. It's a chance. I mean, they love that type of game because it's all action things, but their best players play sevens because it gets them a profile across the world. And they move to, usually they're looking for a big 15s contract, and then that brings them back into the Fiji national setup. And I think, the way sevens is, before, everything happened, that sevens is a perfect place to do that. If you're a young player, come and play in front of huge crowds and, understand pressure and work on the basic skills, get the speed and fitness and show yourself to a bigger audience. I think if I was lucky enough to be involved in a 15s franchise somewhere, that would be a place I would look for because there's some serious talent. Argentina, they're very good at bringing all their best under 20 players in as a group and giving them a couple of years on the circuit. They change their talent on a regular basis, and I think it's a great way to do it.
Yeah. That's excellent. Well, JK will be gutted he missed you because he's actually German and does play sevens, so he would have been trying to sell himself into you, I'm sure. But I'm sure we can catch it another time. I've been asking most, if not all of our guests, lockdown-related question. It is related to rugby as well. Bit of a scenario or a situation for you. You've got to go into lockdown with one player that you've coached, right? You're in lockdown for 2 weeks. People are bringing you food. You literally cannot leave the house. You can't even go out for your exercise or anything like that. Who, out of anyone you've ever coached, would be an absolute nightmare for 2 weeks? Who would make it a living hell and why?
Be careful what I say. I think Jake Teal, who's a young player in Canada, a very talented player, incredibly funny, but the most insecure person I've ever met. And the old fashioned thing, does my bum look big in this? He's a bit like a male version of that. He's always worried that he's not quite there when he's a great guy and a very talented person, but man, his insecurities would drive me mad.
Fair enough. And on the flip side, who would you make it a breeze? Who do you think 2 weeks? Oh, I'd have 4 weeks, 6 weeks with this person.
Probably the coolest guy I've ever met, Nate Hirayama. I don't think Nate's one of those guys who I think, again, I only know him as coach to player, but low maintenance, not much bothers him. He's very calm and collected in just about every circumstance, and I think he'd be a good guy to live it through with.
Awesome. Now,
sorry, go on. I'm just going to, whilst we're on little Neil-style questions, give us a top 3 convert from league to union players.
Oh. Well, Jason Robinson, I think, would be
number 1.
An absolute blinder. I thought Sam Burgess was much better than the press he received.
In the centre or playing in the pack?
I think in the centre he would a decent job.
More from back in the day.
And Ashton, I think, Chris Ashton, very difficult. I think it's much easier to go from union to league than it is from league to union. So, my time with England also coincided with Henry Paul and Faz, Andy Farrell coming across. Neither, I think, received the plaudits that they deserve. But, Faz, one of the all-time great players, I was lucky enough to work with him in Rugby League in that 2000 World Cup. It doesn't surprise me that he's a head coach because, he's a real Martin Johnson type figure. But, I don't think at the time he came across, I'm not so sure he had time to adapt and play. Henry was ultra talented, but played off the cuff to a large degree. And I remember him running to the line as you would in Rugby League, but rugby union at that time hadn't gone that far. It was still a game of depth and space, trying to create space. And I remember him showing the ball and looking for runners and getting clobbered or throwing the ball away. And he received lots of negative press, but I'm not so sure the game he was allowed to develop in the game enough to play at the level they wanted him to play at so soon.
That's the thing. Sometimes they're thrown in at the deep end, aren't they? And it can be quite a cutthroat industry, can't it? Rugby.
Yeah, and I understand why they do. I mean, they pay big money for them. Then you expect a return on it. But I don't think the thought process was there enough to give them time to develop.
Well, along those lines, I mean, we Dodger Sevens, we work in conjunction with a company, Marshalling Men's Minds, and we promote mental health awareness. We're going to all these different festival tournaments all over the UK. Now, this is something we brought up with a few of our guests, predominantly with rugby union, and we've always asked: is there like a good support structure for players in terms of mental health? Is there a good support structure in Sevens structure for that sort of thing, do you think, or is there a long way to go?
I think there's a long way to go. I think individual teams look at mental well-being. I'm not sure whether they do it from a player welfare point of view as much as being focused enough to win. There's a lot about growth mindset and about that winning mentality. It's only it's fairly recent, isn't it, that player welfare side of things and players' personal well-being and how they deal with things. I mentioned Jake Teal, and just mentioning Jake's insecurities, which we laughed at, and we both laughed together about him. But those sort of things are real. You can't take for granted that everybody's dealing with things in the right way, and I think it's in this modern times, it's something that has to be the forefront of everything we do. Unfortunately, I'm sure you're the same. I know too many people who've not been able, strong enough to be able to take it and have, gone too far. It's something we have to be aware of all the time.
And that's the thing. I mean, with obviously the lockdown that we're in at the moment, unfortunately, in terms of people's mental states, it can only get worse, can't it? Until we're back to normal. So it's just something that I think we've all got to notice in our friends, in our family. But I think we are, it's opened up. The one positive from this, and I have said it on a couple of podcasts before, but I will keep reiterating it. The one positive from this lockdown period is that everyone, ironically, is talking more through social media. It used to take the concentration away. Now everyone's WhatsApping, Skyping, Zooming, that sort of thing. So it's hopefully we can carry on being as close to each other afterwards.
I hope so. I hope that personal connection stays, because it's not always evident that people are struggling and having troubles, and it's only through talking to them that you can maybe get an inkling there's a problem.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, on that, Damian, I think we'll end on that lovely note. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on.
No, it's great to talk to someone.
You're more than welcome to come back on when we've got some rugby to talk about, and when things start kicking off again. We'd love to have you back on for an update and a roundup.
Lovely. I'd love to do that. Thank you. Thanks for asking me, and I enjoyed it.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers, Damian.